There's a huge stone obelisk that was supposed to be taller than a 10-story building, lying unfinished in the Egyptian desert. That's the Obelisk of Aswan, and it looks like it was made using the same technique as Machu Picchu, thousands of miles away. The plan of its creators was to build the largest and heaviest single stone monument the Egyptians ever created. But something interrupted their plans. Over 3,500 years ago, workers began carving this obelisk directly from the solid granite bedrock. They had nothing but simple copper tools and wooden wedges. They had to be extremely precise because obelisks were important symbols of Pharaoh's power and their connection to the deities. The most common version is that Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's greatest rulers, ordered this enormous obelisk to be made. Though some experts think it may have been meant for Pharaoh Thutmose I. If it had been completed, it would have stood 137 feet tall and weighed nearly 1,200 tons, as heavy as 200 elephants. Its surface has smooth, hollowed-out sections that seem as if someone had dug out the granite, just like ice cream. Researchers called this effect scooping, but how it was done is still a mystery. It looks like the same scooping technique was used to build several megalithic sites in South America, where ancient builders shaped stones in a curved, hollowed-out way. But it is the only construction with such a surface in Egypt. You can see the scooped-out lines at the sides of the obelisk, and they continue down into the ground, following an almost perfect path along the bedrock. The workers first chipped away the rough shape and then used a clever trick. They hammered wooden wedges into cracks and soaked them with water to make the wood expand and split the stone. This method, combined with grinding tools made of harder stone, allowed them to shape the obelisk with incredible precision. But just when the workers were close to finishing, a huge crack appeared in the stone. There was no way to fix it, and instead of removing the broken stone, the Egyptians left the obelisk half buried in the ground. Perhaps they were afraid that a monument with a flaw would tarnish the reputation of the pharaoh and the builders. The obelisk has stayed there ever since, and its bottom side is still attached to the bedrock. It was discovered in the early 20th century after it had been covered by sand for thousands of years. And even in its unfinished condition, it is one of the most important archaeological finds in Egypt, as it has given scientists unusual valuable insights into ancient Egyptian stoneworking techniques. There's another large rock nearby. It's almost completely scooped out at its base, with only a tiny bit of granite still attached to the ground. It looks as if someone tried to separate it from the bedrock, but left it hanging by a thread. There's hardly room for one person to squeeze in and shape the rock in this way. So, perhaps ancient workers used tools or techniques we don't even know about. Another ancient Egyptian marvel is the Great Pyramid. All four sides of it are aligned with all four sides of the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. According to archaeologist and engineer Glenn Dash, the alignment is accurate to within 1/15th of a degree. The architects managed to achieve this without modern tools like drones, blueprints, or computers. Many researchers tried to explain this construction miracle. One theory was that the builders used a pole star or the sun's shadow. But Dash recently proposed that the Egyptians might have used the autumnal equinox to align the pyramids. It happens twice a year when the Earth's equator passes through the center of the sun's disk, making day and night nearly equal in length. To test his theory, Dash conducted an experiment on the 22nd of September, 2016, the day of the fall equinox. He used a special rod to cast a shadow and tracked its tip at regular intervals to form a smooth curve. He connected 2 points of the curve with a taut string and created an almost perfect east-west line. On the equinox, the shadow's tip runs a straight line, nearly perfectly east-west, and with a slight counterclockwise error. There's a similar error in the pyramids. Although his experiment was conducted in Connecticut, Dash believed that the same method would work in Egypt. All the ancient Egyptians needed was a clear, sunny day. They could determine the fall equinox by counting 91 days from the summer solstice. But they left us a few clues, and no engineering documents or architectural plans have been found that explain their methods. So they might have mapped shadows, but we can't be sure. Some Roman bridges were built more than 2,000 years ago, but many of them are still standing, and some are even still in use today. The Romans needed bridges to move their powerful forces quickly across rivers and valleys. To do this, they trained special engineers and craftsmen who became experts in construction. These builders traveled all over the Roman Empire, shared their knowledge, and made sure every bridge was built the best way possible. One of the Romans' best ideas was using arches instead of flat beams. Arches spread out the weight of the bridge, making it much stronger and able to last longer. To solve the problem of building bridge supports in water, the Romans invented something called a cofferdam. First, they would hammer large wooden walls into the riverbed and seal the gaps with clay to keep water out. Then, they poured concrete inside the dry space they had created, forming a super strong base for the bridge. One famous bridge that used this trick is the Sant'Angelo Bridge in Rome. It was built more than 1,800 years ago, and it's still standing today over the Tiber River. Unfortunately, many of the Roman engineers' blueprints and records have been lost over time. A few ancient writers wrote about Roman construction methods, but they didn't record every detail. Today, scientists and historians have to study the bridges themselves to figure out how they were built. The problem is that even though many Roman bridges still stand today, they aren't always exactly as they were when they were first built. Some survived because they were made from extra strong materials. Others were carefully repaired and maintained over the centuries. Some bridges weren't used much, so they stayed in good shape simply because they didn't wear out. Even when modern engineers study these bridges, they know that some parts have been rebuilt or restored many times. Ancient amphitheaters had such great acoustics that modern scientists use computer programs and special sound simulations to figure out how it worked. Many of these open-air theaters are partially ruined, so experts recreate them in digital models to test how sound travels inside them. But some ancient theaters, like the famous theater of Epidaurus in Greece, are still so well preserved that scientists can measure the sound in real life. The acoustics there is so perfect that you can hear someone speaking on stage clearly, even from the very top row. The curved, bowl-like shape of the theater worked like a giant speaker that naturally amplified voices and music. The seats were placed at different heights and angles so that the sound waves moved smoothly through the theater. Hard materials like marble and stone were great at bouncing sound waves across the theater, so voices and music were louder and clearer. But too much echo would make words hard to understand, so ancient architects used soft materials like curtains, carpet, and even special awnings to absorb extra sound waves and keep the acoustics perfect. One of the largest and most famous Roman amphitheaters, the Colosseum in Rome, had a huge retractable awning that could be pulled across the top to block out the sun and also reduce excess echoes, making sure the audience could hear every word and sound without distortion. Where an amphitheater was built also helped with sound. Many ancient theaters were designed facing east to west, so during afternoon performances, the actors and musicians were bathed in natural sunlight.
It turns out the Great Pyramid of Giza might be way older than we think, like over 20,000 years old. That's older than farming or written language. But then, who built such astonishing monuments? Were those even human? Italian researcher Alberto Donini based his idea on something called the relative erosion method. In short, you look at how stone wears down over time and say, yeah, this kind of damage would take way longer than a few thousand years. But before we dive deeper, here's a quick refresher on the pyramids themselves. The pyramids of Giza are some of the oldest giant stone structures ever made by humans. Two of them are still the tallest pyramids ever built in the ancient world, and the Great Pyramid of Khufu is the tallest of the three. There's one more reason why that Great Pyramid is special. It's the only one of the original 7 wonders of the ancient world that's still standing today. Now, these pyramids weren't built in one sudden aha moment. A lot of people over many generations worked on them, and you can see their progress over time. Early pyramids have mistakes, weird angles, and structural issues. As for the later ones, they get cleaner and more efficient. It looks like the builders were slowly figuring things out. Each generation solved new engineering problems and got better at it. It's like updates to a smartphone. Each new version is smoother and more advanced. This brings us to the big questions. How old are the pyramids? And who built them? Oh, and how on earth did people move and stack stones that weigh as much as trucks without modern machines? Well, so far we have pretty solid evidence for the general timeline and the workers involved in the process. But the exact construction methods are still debated. And that's why claims like this 20,000-year-old pyramid idea get so popular. Most historians stick with the traditional dating, around 4,500 years old. Now, let's get back to the relative erosion method. Wind, rain, heat, cold, they all slowly eat away at rock. And the longer a stone sits outside, the more damage it collects. Like how an old sidewalk looks way rougher than a brand new one. And the Great Pyramid wasn't always rough and blocky. It used to be wrapped in smooth white limestone. But after a big earthquake in the year 1303, Egyptians pulled off the outer stones and used them to rebuild Cairo. That's why parts of the pyramid have only been exposed to the weather for about 675 years. At the base of the pyramid, there's a limestone pavement. Some of it was hidden under those casing stones for thousands of years and only got exposed after they were removed. Right next to it, there's pavement made of the same stone, but it has been exposed since the day the pyramid was built. These different amounts of time in the open turn the pyramid into a natural stopwatch. Basically, Donini looked at two parts of the same stone, asking a simple question. If this much damage happened in 675 years, how long would it take to make that much damage? To get the answer, he didn't examine just one spot. He checked 12 different places around the pyramid, because stone doesn't wear down evenly everywhere. Some areas get more wind, others are exposed to more sun, and some may have tiny cracks that speed things up. Because of that, the numbers he got were very different. Some spots made the pyramid seem pretty young. Other spots made it seem crazy old. So instead of picking one number, he averaged them all together. And when he did that, the average came out to around 25,000 years old. If that estimate is even a bit close, it would mean the pyramid was built way earlier than we think, somewhere around 2300 BCE. Now, Donini doesn't claim this is an exact date. According to his analysis, there's a strong chance that the pyramid is much older than traditionally believed, but it's not a guarantee. So, it's no wonder that a lot of experts strongly disagree with this theory, which makes it controversial. Now, that's a great thing about science. It's based on facts, not whatever is popular at the time. But let's sneak a peek inside these mysterious ancient pyramids. The Great Pyramid is the oldest of the three famous pyramids of Giza, and it's also the biggest. It was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, who ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty. If you've ever heard the name Cheops, that's just the Greek version of Khufu's name. Basically, same guy, like Robert versus Bob. Right next to the Great Pyramid, there are two more large pyramids. Those weren't some random projects, they were built for Khufu's family. All three were constructed during Egypt's Old Kingdom, spread out over 3 generations of rulers. We really can't pin down the exact dates because we don't have enough evidence. Historians have to piece the whole story together with the help of ancient records, inscriptions, and radiocarbon dating, like assembling a timeline from half-burned notes and faded receipts. One big mystery is whether each pharaoh lived long enough to see their pyramid finished. These projects were massive and took years, even decades. It's very possible that some pyramids were completed by the next ruler after the original pharaoh passed away. The Great Pyramid itself was likely built around 100 years after an earlier one, which was a step pyramid. It was kind of a prototype that helped Egyptian builders figure out how to go from stacked steps to smooth-sided giants. But how did they actually pull this off? Because stacking millions of giant rocks into a perfectly shaped pyramid is not something you do when you're bored. First thing we should consider, nobody had really done this before. The older pyramid was more like a giant stone staircase. So cool, but very different. The pyramids at Giza were a whole new level. That's like going from building a shed to suddenly constructing a skyscraper and somehow not messing it up. For one thing, ancient Egypt had it pretty good back then. Every year the Nile flooded, and when the water went away, it left behind super fertile soil. In other words, they had tons of food, more than enough to keep people alive and feed a massive workforce. That extra food powered the pyramid project. The rulers figured out how to organize farming really well. They took that extra food and used it to support thousands of workers. Now, speaking of workers, some people likely worked on the pyramids full-time. Others were farmers who helped out when they weren't busy in the fields. Some people probably paid their taxes by doing labor. Plus, researchers found notes that showed a lot of day-to-day planning. During the wet season, Egyptians used shallow boats to float heavy stones closer to the site instead of dragging everything across land. So, the river was handling a lot of the heavy lifting. The real headache was getting those massive stones up. You just can't lift a multi-ton rock over your head and hope for the best. The defeat would be crushing. The builders had to use ramps. But if you build one long straight ramp from the ground all the way to the top of the pyramid, that ramp would be so huge it'd be like another pyramid. Like, congrats, you built the wrong pyramid first. So because of that, people came up with other ideas. Maybe the ramp wrapped around the outside, spiraling up like a parking garage. Or maybe the ramp was hidden inside the pyramid, which sounds cool and mysterious, but there's not great proof for it yet. What helped a lot was a discovery of an old stone quarry called Hatnub from the same time period. Archaeologists found a super steep ramp system that everyone used to think was impossible. It had holes for wooden posts on the sides, and workers probably used ropes and sleds to drag huge stone blocks uphill. Just imagine a group of people hauling a sled while looping ropes around posts for extra leverage. It's like ancient gym bros doing leg day non-stop. If the pyramid builders used something like that, it means the ramps didn't need to be massive. They could be way shorter and steeper. In any case, the mystery of the pyramids is far from solved. Maybe one day, someone will discover the rest of the tale. Hey, I bet you didn't know that trees used to grow in the middle of Egypt's barren, sun-roasted Sinai desert. It's true. If you can't picture it, I don't blame you. But archaeologists have recently stumbled upon a tree-lined boulevard. Yep, an actual green avenue, leading to a massive ancient fortress. No, this isn't some mirage or an overactive imagination, although I do have one. But it's turning our ideas of ancient Egyptian desert life upside down. Let's rewind a bit. The site in question is called Tel Abu Saifi, located in the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula. For a long time, it was known as a dusty archaeological footnote, the home of ruins from the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. You know, the era after Alexander the Great swaggered through Egypt and the Roman Empire called dibs. But recently, Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities decided to give it a fresh dig. And what they found out turned to be more than just a forgotten outpost. We're talking about a full-on military fortress with defensive trenches, paved roads, lime kilns, barracks for soldiers, and even room for their families. A whole bunch of living quarters right in the middle of a desert doesn't feel very homey until you remember our star, the unexpected Green Avenue. This road was over 300 feet long and 36 feet wide, as long as an American football field, paved with limestone slabs and lined with more than 500 clay planting pits. These weren't for show. They held actual trees, creating a shaded tree-line entrance straight to the fortress. Imagine walking through that, the sun blazing overhead, and suddenly, blessed shade. Ooh. Now, that's not just a grand entrance, that's an ancient red carpet, or maybe a green one. But this wasn't about curb appeal. The existence of hundreds of trees in a desert landscape over 2,000 years ago tells us something big. You see, the Ptolemaic Egyptians weren't simply good at building monuments. They were also masters of water management. In a place where rainfall is rarer than a selfie with a pharaoh, they somehow found a way to grow rows of trees. Now, let that sink in. To irrigate that many trees in a desert, they must have had a sophisticated irrigation or water transport system, something capable of moving and distributing water efficiently in this harsh climate. Maybe they channeled groundwater, or maybe they captured seasonal rain, or maybe ancient sprinkler systems. Okay, maybe not that fancy. But still, it's clear they were ahead of their time. Here's the thing, we already know the Egyptians mastered water control. They harnessed the Nile with ditches and canals to feed distant fields. So irrigation wasn't exactly a mystery to them. They had the skills and the knowledge. And sure, scientists still debate what the Sinai climate was like 2,000 years ago. But many believe it may have once been greener. After all, take one look at those dramatic mountains and rocky landscapes, shaped and sculpted as if by brute force of ancient rivers. And it's hard not to think that water once played a bigger role out there. Plus, archaeologists have found tons of evidence showing that Ptolemaic Egyptians cultivated fruits, vines, and trees on a large scale. In other words, growing a forest in a desert might feel wild to us, but to them, it was just another Tuesday. And now, this green avenue is making archaeologists wonder, what if similar irrigation systems were used elsewhere, say for transporting the enormous stones used to build the pyramids? There's already a theory that ancient rivers or human-made canals help move those stones. And the Tel Abu Saifi discovery? Well, it might just be the missing puzzle piece. This isn't just a dream. Back then, rivers were like highways, power grids, and cargo trains of the ancient world, all rolled into one. Egyptians used them for everything: irrigating crops, trading goods, powering industry, and even mobilizing for war. If you were doing something important, odds are it involved a river. But wait, it gets even better. Excavations revealed deep defensive trenches, like ancient moats, dug more than 6 feet deep around the fortress. Those weren't just muddy ditches. They were part of an elaborate defense system designed to be filled or bridged to control access. Think of it as ancient Egypt's version of a retractable security gate, minus the hydraulics. And while the trenches were keeping intruders out, life inside the fortress was bustling. Remember how we said archaeologists had found military housing units? It turns out soldiers might have lived there with their families. So this wasn't just a barracks. It was a thriving community, with meals, routines, kids playing, and probably a whole lot of ancient gossip flying around the dinner table. In addition to all the military stuff, researchers found 4 massive lime kilns used to produce quicklime, an essential ingredient for making construction mortar. These kilns are a big deal because they suggest that during the later Roman period, Tel Abu Saifi turned into an industrial hub. It was like the Home Depot of ancient Egypt, churning out materials to build and repair buildings. But here's where the plot thickens. Underneath all of this, beneath the roads, the trenches, the kilns, archaeologists found the corners of an even older structure, a mystery building. Could it be the remains of a third, much older fortress? Or an ancient cemetery or lost city? Nobody knows yet, but one thing's clear, this story isn't over. Honestly, this might be the coolest archaeological cliffhanger of the decade. So, what does this all mean? Well, for starters, it challenges everything we assumed about desert life in ancient Egypt. For the longest time, deserts were thought of as natural barriers, dry, deadly, and empty. But this find suggests that the desert might have once been green and full of life, not because the climate was dramatically different, but because the Egyptians were incredibly good at bending the environment to their will. They didn't just survive in the desert, they transformed it. It also adds fuel to the fire in the age-old debate about ancient Egyptian tech. If they could build a fortress with tree-lined roads, moats, irrigation, and industry in the middle of the Sinai, is it really such a stretch to imagine they could engineer water channels to move pyramid stones? Forget the Ancient Aliens TV show. Sure, it's entertaining, I'll give you that, but it makes us forget something crucial. Those people were brilliant. A lot of what we call modern technology is recycled ancient ingenuity. And who knows how much knowledge we've lost over time. Meanwhile, the dig continues. Scientists are now mapping the entire Tel Abu Saifi site, trying to piece together how all the structures connect. Some want to analyze soil samples to find traces of old tree roots and maybe even figure out what kinds of trees once grew there. Imagine if they were date palms. We might be looking at the world's oldest snack lane. You already know that the implications of the discoveries don't stop with history books, right? This kind of discovery has modern relevance too. Our world is going through a lot of change, with crazy weather and huge heat waves. So maybe we should be asking, what can we learn from ancient civilizations that once made the desert bloom? If nothing else, Tel Abu Saifi reminds us that the ancient Egyptians were more than just pharaohs, pyramids, and mummies. They were visionary planners, eco-architects, and straight-up problem solvers. They didn't wait for nature to hand them what they needed. They engineered it. And thanks to discoveries like this, we're getting a clearer picture of just how advanced and, frankly, how cool ancient Egyptian civilization really was. So next time someone tells you deserts are just empty wastelands, you can hit them with this fun fact. Over 2,000 years ago, in the heart of the Sinai Desert, there was a fortress with a tree-lined avenue, moats, military housing, an industrial center, and even a secret underground structure. Take that, sand dunes! Who knows what else is still buried out there, waiting to rewrite history?
For over 3,000 years, no one knew this place even existed. And then, out of nowhere, archaeologists digging near Alexandria uncovered something absolutely shocking: a forgotten Egyptian city. This place is buried under Greek ruins, hiding secrets that could rewrite the history of pharaohs and their armies. And one of the artifacts, which looks like a simple wine jug, changed everything. We thought that we already placed all the important parts on the map of ancient Egypt: pyramids, Thebes, Luxor, Alexandria. But nope, the map just got an update. The new city was a big deal, and it's about 3,400 years old. It's just been discovered at the site called Kom el Nugus. This place is located west of Alexandria and tucked between the Mediterranean and a saltwater lake called Lake Mariut. This discovery raised a few eyebrows. Scientists thought that this place used to be empty and that it was only settled by the Greeks in about 332 BCE. But it turns out that people lived in Kom el Nugus way before that. When archaeologists were digging through Greek ruins, they started noticing something unexpected: mud brick walls. Yep, you know, the pyramid type. That's the kind Egyptians built during the New Kingdom. These mud bricks were made from mud, clay, sand, and straw. These ingredients were mixed with water and dried in the sun, not baked. Egyptians used them for thousands of years to build houses, temples, palaces, and yes, the pyramids. Of course, other civilizations did use mud brick too, but Egyptian mud brick is kinda quirky. They used straw that grew in their regions, layout styles, and mortar. That's what helped the experts realize that Egyptians used to hang out in Kom el Nugus. That alone raised eyebrows, and then they found more. An entire street layout, buried structures, and even a temple built by Ramses the Great himself. His name speaks for itself. This guy was one of the most famous pharaohs in all of Egyptian history. He ruled ancient Egypt for 60 years, fought huge battles, and just loved building tons of stuff like that temple. People loved him so much that later pharaohs literally pretended to be him or wrote his name on their buildings. That's when archaeologists realized that they weren't looking at some dusty mud bricks of a tiny village. That's an entire buried city. They immediately started digging more. Turns out the whole place wasn't random. It was built with great care. The streets had drains to stop rainwater from damaging the soft mud-bricked walls. There were also small tomb chapels with writings about soldiers. This suggests this place might have been the military base, and that changes a lot. In ancient Egypt, when the military showed up, there must have been a reason. So what was it? Protection? Conquest? Control of something important? In the case of this city, it was probably about wine, water, and trade on the edge of the desert. What's even crazier is that we still don't know just how big it was. The team has only uncovered part of it so far. There could be fortifications, warehouses, administrative buildings, or even more religious or royal structures waiting underground. We also don't know what this town was called in ancient times. That name is still buried. But it might be uncovered someday, maybe inside a wall, maybe on a scroll, maybe on another broken jug. One of those already turned out to be a mind-blower. A chunk of a ceramic jar, called an amphora, had a royal seal pressed into it, and that seal bore the name Meritaton. Princess Meritaton wasn't just anyone. She was the eldest daughter of Queen Nefertiti and the older sister of King Tutankhamun. Yes, that's right. Both Nefertiti and King Tut were involved here. All that was about a century before Ramses the Great built one of his temples here. Looks like the city was founded back in the days of another pharaoh, the pharaoh Akhenaten, husband of Queen Nefertiti, father of Princess Meritaton, and future king Tutankhamun. That guy, Akhenaten, was a bit of a wild card. He was the type who really gets weird about one of his interests. He tried to completely change Egypt's religion, forcing everyone to worship the sun disk called Aten instead of the usual deities. He basically told all Egypt that all their mythology was wrong, and from now on, there will be no more Osiris, no more Thoth or Set. Just raw sunlight only, people. That's known in history as the Amarna period. And he went all in. Changed his name, built an entirely new capital city called Amarna in the middle of the desert, redesigned temples, rewrote hymns, and even banned traditional religious imagery. Even the art got wild at the time. People started getting elongated heads, belly rolls, and all that humanity and vulnerability carved into stone. It was deliberately weird. He wanted to show the family not as perfect gods, but as human vessels of divine light. Everyone had to awkwardly smile and play along because he was the pharaoh after all. The wackiest part is that after his rule, his son, Tutankhamun, reversed all the sun disk-related stuff. He literally changed his name from Tutankhaten, which means living image of the Aten, the sun disk, to Tutankhamun, which means living image of Amun, one of the great older deities. King Tut brought back the old deities, reopened the temples, and erased as much of Akhenaten's legacy as possible. Looks like his family didn't really like the sun cult after all. Meanwhile, this discovered wine jug shows that the city was probably active, thriving with life during Akhenaten's times. That's huge. Up until now, there was no clear evidence that his radical ideas and projects extended all the way to the north. The jug also shows that vineyards and wine production reached all the way to the north in ancient Egypt. Wine really was a huge deal, worthy of placing a military base here. Princess Meritaton most likely used this jug. Just like with her brother, she was born into the sun and named after it. Her name, also spelled Meritaten, meant beloved of the Aten. As the eldest daughter of Pharaoh and his queen, born right into the middle of radical religious changes, she was raised to perform the future queen's duties. From her earliest years, she walked in temples alongside her mother Nefertiti, shaking the sistrum in solemn rituals. She was there when Akhenaten established his capital city, Amarna. He clearly loved his family. Meritaton's face was etched into its stone walls more than anyone else. In every temple, in every sacred scene, her figure appears, revered. Things get foggy in history after her father passed away. The throne wobbled. King Tut was very young, only 9 years old when he had to take new duties. Meritaton seemed to have been a brief step between her father and her younger brother. She married someone called Smenkhkare. History isn't even sure who that mysterious man was. Could have been a puppet, a phantom king in a crumbling dynasty. May have even been her brother. Whatever the truth was, these two took power and ruled together for a while. Meritaton got the title of the Great Royal Wife, a title of immense power. But Smenkhkare was a very short-lived ruler. He passed away just in about a year. There are some speculations among historians that Merenidton was the actual ruler, the informal female pharaoh, because her brother was too young. Some theories say that she raised Tutankhamun and became a sort of queen regent, mentoring the child who would be used to restore the old order. But all this is unconfirmed. It's very hard for historians to find information about that time because the Amarna period was later condemned. The successors wanted to wipe away Akhenaten's heresy and everything attached to it. This included Merenidton. So even if she ruled, even if she mothered Tut, they tried to bury her in the sands of history. In any case, perhaps this new uncovered city will tell us more about the mysteries of the Amarna period, one of the most chaotic periods of ancient Egypt.
Miles and miles of yellow sand, treeless mountain ridges, and scorching hot sun over your head. And suddenly, something you'd never expect to come across in a barren desert. A small group of overexcited people. They're as happy as you would be if you'd won a lottery. They've just found an ancient tomb, once flooded with its walls in bad shape. But the stuff they discovered inside proves that this is the burial site of one of Egypt's most mysterious pharaohs. Historians have been hunting for his tomb for years, but no one expected it to hide ancient treasures. Fast forward. After careful examination of the site, Egyptian officials have announced the discovery of the tomb of King Thutmose II. It's the last missing tomb from Egypt's 18th dynasty. And this is also the first royal tomb found since King Tutankhamun's was discovered in 1922, in more than 100 years. A team of Egyptian and British archaeologists found the tomb in the Theban Mountains area, west of Luxor, near the famous Valley of the Kings. Before this, the site was only known as Tomb C4, but during their excavation, the team found clear evidence proving it belonged to King Thutmose II. Archaeologists actually found the entrance and main tunnel leading to the tomb in 2022. But at first, they thought it belonged to a queen because it was near the graves of Thutmose III's wives. It was also close to Queen Hatshepsut's tomb. Originally, it was prepared for her when she was just a royal wife. But everything changed when she became pharaoh. But we'll talk about this twist of fate a little later. But soon they realized that their discovery was much more significant. They found alabaster jars with Thutmose II's name and the words "deceased king" written on them. That's when they realized that the tomb was actually his final resting place. Sadly, Thutmose II's tomb has seen better days. According to the head of Egypt's antiquities sector and the leader of the Egyptian excavation team, the tomb suffered major damage from ancient floods not long after the pharaoh's death. Water swept through the burial chamber, likely destroying or displacing many of the original artifacts. Much of what had been once inside the tomb was moved elsewhere in an attempt to salvage it. The researchers found out that the tomb had a basic design, with an entrance, a sloping main corridor, and a burial chamber. The corridor was coated in white plaster and rose about 4.5 feet above the floor of the burial chamber. A large staircase and a very large descending corridor of the tomb indicated its grandeur. It took the team a long time to navigate through, though, as the tomb was blocked by flood debris and collapsed ceilings. Only after crawling through a 32-foot passageway with a small 16-inch gap at the top, the worst nightmare for those of us with claustrophobia, were they able to reach the burial chamber. There, they were in for another surprise. They cleared the debris, expecting to find the crushed remains of a burial beneath. But the tomb turned out to be completely empty, and it was not due to robbery. It had been deliberately emptied. The researchers soon realized that the tomb had been flooded since it had been built underneath a waterfall. It happened just a few years after the king's burial, so the contents of the tomb were moved to another location. That's why there was a second corridor in the tomb. It was most likely made to help remove King Thutmose II's body from his flooded tomb. Despite the damage, the excavation team made some really exciting discoveries. They found traces of mortar decorated with blue inscriptions, yellow stars, and fragments from the Book of Amduat. one of the most significant funerary texts in ancient Egypt. The book was meant to guide the deceased through the underworld, ensuring a safe journey to the afterlife. Now, how about we sneak a peek at ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty? It was all about conquering lands, expanding the empire, and building jaw-dropping monuments. Some of the biggest names from that era, Thutmose I and Thutmose III, both legendary warrior kings who left their mark in history. Thutmose I was a fierce fighter who led major military campaigns, pushing Egypt's border further south than ever before, all the way to the fourth cataract of the Nile. His victories gave Egypt access to new trade routes, stronger political ties, and more wealth. His conquests were so significant that they were recorded in the tombs of his top officials. Thutmose III, sometimes called Thutmose the Great, took things even further. He was not only an incredible military strategist, but also the commander of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's armies before becoming king himself. He led between 17 and 20 military campaigns, winning every single one and expanding Egypt's empire to its peak. He even created the world's first navy. Thutmose III is often remembered as Egypt's greatest warrior pharaoh. And sandwiched between these two powerhouses was Thutmose II, a pharaoh who doesn't get nearly as much attention. Hey, the middle child, right? His reign lasted only about 5 years before he passed away at around age 30 in 1479 BCE. He is kind of a mystery. No one really knows what he accomplished. For the longest time, even the location of his burial site was totally unknown. His body was actually found in the 19th century. It was just lying around in the mortuary temple of Deir el-Bahari, in a secret chamber where priests used to hide royal mummies centuries after their original tombs were looted by grave robbers. In other words, Thutmose II's body must have been moved from his original resting place at some point in history to protect it. During his lifetime, Thutmose II made at least one major impact on Egyptian history. He married his half-sister Hatshepsut. That might not sound like a big deal, but it helped her become Egypt's greatest female pharaoh after he passed. The catch? She kept her stepson, Thutmose III, off the throne for decades. When he finally took power, he erased her name from history out of spite. And still, Hatshepsut is one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, no matter if you're talking about a man or a woman. She brought a lot of wealth and art to Egypt. She led a big trading trip to a place called Punt, where she brought back things like gold, ebony, and incense. She also made sure her name lasted by building amazing structures that we can still see today. At Karnak, she added huge obelisks. One of them is still standing tall. She also was the one to build the Temple of Deir el-Bahari with its countless columns. She was buried there. Interestingly, Hatshepsut was often shown in art as a man with muscles and a beard, like how pharaohs were usually depicted. But she made sure there was always something in the artwork that reminded people she was a woman, like calling herself Daughter of Re or His Majesty herself. When she passed away in 1458 BCE, Egypt wouldn't have a female ruler as powerful as her until Cleopatra, about 1400 years later. According to Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities Secretary General, isn't that a mouthful? Hatshepsut's name actually appears in Thutmose II's tomb, meaning she might have even handled his burial. As for their final resting places, well, Hatshepsut was buried in the Valley of the Kings, and Thutmose II's mummy is now in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, alongside other ancient Egyptian rulers. It gives visitors a rare chance to see the remains of a nearly forgotten pharaoh. Now, experts consider the discovery of his tomb to be one of the most significant in recent years. The artifacts found there add important details to our understanding of the history of the region and Thutmose II's rule. And even though the tomb's design is fairly simple and follows the same architectural style preferred by later Egyptian rulers, its historical importance is undeniable. In any case, the mission isn't over yet. Archaeologists are now focusing on solving another mystery. Where did the rest of the tomb's contents end up? The team is determined to continue their search. Who knows what other secrets they will uncover that have remained hidden beneath the sands for thousands of years.
This coffin seems to defy logic. No visible openings, no way in or out. And yet, inside lies Lady Shanette Ah, a mysterious woman from ancient Egypt, perfectly preserved even after 3,000 years. How did she get there? It was the third intermediate period in Egypt, a time between great dynasties. Pharaohs wore the blue crowns. Priests in Thebes were almost as powerful as kings. Markets were filled with the cries of merchants selling dates, papyrus, and precious perfumes. Lady Shanette Ah was in her late 30s or early 40s, old age by Egyptian standards of that time. Like other Egyptians at the time, she ate meals of bread, lentils, and fish. By that age, her teeth were already badly worn down, yellowish with enamel eroded, because food in ancient Egypt often had grains of sand in it. But she wasn't just a regular woman. When she passed away for unknown reasons, her burial was lavish. Locals wrapped her body in expensive linen and adorned with artificial eyes to replace her real ones. That would help her see in the afterlife. And that's exactly how we found her 3,000 years later, in a beautifully decorated sarcophagus. It was made of cartonnage, which is kind of like papier-mâché, made by layering linen and papyrus with adhesive. These coffins were wildly strong, lasting for thousands of years, all thanks to Egypt's super dry climate. But most importantly, Egyptians only used it for the elite. So she was someone very important to the locals, though we might never know why. But there was only one huge problem with her mummy. How did they even put her in the coffin? No matter how much researchers looked, there were simply no entry points. The only visible gap was a tiny slit near her feet. But that's not nearly large enough to place her entire body inside. This mystery puzzled them for decades, until they finally learned the truth only recently. They study those mummies at the Field Museum in Chicago using new technology, CT scans. It's basically like taking thousands of X-rays and piecing them together to create detailed 3D images. That's how we can learn more about the bodies without disturbing them. And it turns out the ancient Egyptians were unbelievably clever. They didn't construct the cartonnage around Shanette Ah's body, which would be a common and easy thing to do. Instead, embalmers created the coffin first. Then, they softened this coffin with moisture to make it flexible. After that, they carefully molded it around her wrapped body. They did cut a slit along the back of the coffin to do that, but then they laced it up like a corset, so it seemed like there were no openings. Finally, they secured a wooden panel at her feet to keep everything in place. That's where the tiny slit came from. Usually, the insides were removed and put in jars, symbolically guarded by the 4 sons of Horus. Egyptians believed that the deceased would need all that stuff once they got into the afterlife. They also thought it would help preserve the body for ages, which, as we can see, worked amazingly well. Thanks to their beliefs, we now have mummies as time capsules. Each son of Horus was supposed to protect each of the specific body parts. The human-headed Imseti for the liver, the baboon-headed Hapi for the lungs, the jackal-headed Dalmutef for the stomach, and the falcon-headed Kebis Senuv for the intestines. It's crazy how much effort the embalmers put into their job, especially in Lady Shanette Ah. They wanted to make sure her body remains untouched and the sarcophagus would be perfect for her. You can't help but wonder, who was she if she mattered so much? The ancient Egyptians literally viewed the afterlife as modern retirement planning. You're not just passing away. You gotta prepare yourself for it. Prepare the body, eyes to see, and so on. And the richer or more important you were, the better your afterlife would be. But Shanette Ah wasn't the only fascinating mummy they studied. They also decided to scan Harwa, an Egyptian man who lived around the same time. Judging by the mummy, he also had a high social status. His mummy revealed no signs of hard labor, and his teeth were well kept. which means he enjoyed some high-quality food without tons of sand in it. Some fellas got lucky both in life and after it. But there were many mysterious mummies throughout history. One of them is Chin Tzu, also known as Lady Di. The story of her began in 1968. Some workers near Changsha, China, were digging an air raid shelter for a hospital. But suddenly, they accidentally uncovered an ancient burial site. They came down there and stumbled upon something incredible. 3 tombs belonging to a noblewoman, her husband, and a young man believed to be their son. She was a noblewoman from ancient China, and she had a fascinating backstory. She lived over 2,000 years ago during the Western Han Dynasty. She was married to Li Kang, a guy who served as chancellor to the Changsha Kingdom, a high-ranking official. At first, it looks like Lady Di lived a life of luxury and privilege. She had private musicians to play at her parties, and for her personal enjoyment. She probably played the guqin, an instrument that back in the day people associated with intellect and elegance. And she certainly ate like an empress. Fine meats, delicacies, and all things like that. Even her wardrobe was full of some exquisite silk, not even mentioning the tons of cosmetics. But all this wealth came at a cost. The more she aged, the worse her health became. She got a full pack: a heart condition, diabetes, high pressure, and liver issues. It also looks like her back was driving her crazy, probably making it hard for her to even move. Finally, as a cherry on top, she developed gallstones. All this packed together eventually led to a heart attack that took her life around the age of 50. There was one haunting detail. Scientists found over 130 melon seeds in her stomach and intestines. Most likely, she ate watermelon just hours before she passed away, which means it was probably during summer when the fruit was ripe. She enjoyed a sweet, simple treat before her life was cut short. The excavation began in 1972, and this wasn't easy at all. Over 1,500 local students had to help. And Lady Di was the most mysterious one. She was buried in 4 rectangular pine boxes, one inside the other like a Matryoshka doll, all wrapped in 20 layers of silk, and all that sealed with lots of charcoal and white clay. The coffins were painted beautifully as well, adorned with protective deities, mythical animals, and clouds which symbolized the heavens. There were drawings of divine creatures and Mount Kunlun. The myth said that on this mountain, people reach eternal happiness. All this told us a lot about the Han Dynasty, their beliefs about afterlife, art, daily lives, and their remarkable craftsmanship. And then researchers finally got to the body. It was astonishing. Soft skin, joints that could still bend, and in general, she was almost intact. She even kept her hair, eyelashes, fingerprints, and even traces of blood. It's like she literally passed away only a few weeks ago. Ancient people used a very clever technique to preserve her. It looks like embalmers put her into some weird, mysterious acidic liquid. This liquid prevented bacteria from growing. Unfortunately, it also gave rashes to all the scientists that touched Lady Di. And this rash lasted for 3 months. And you know what they buried together with her? Over 1,400 artifacts, mostly personal stuff like silk clothes, cosmetics, and musical instruments. Even food, grains, meats, wine, and pastries. There were also 162 carved wooden figurines of various servants and musicians. It's possible that they were either just there to service her even in the afterlife, or maybe based on her actual servants.
If there's a question that still baffles archaeologists to this day, it's this one. How did the ancient Egyptians build those magnificent pyramids? As far as we know today, their resources were quite limited, especially in terms of tools and building materials. We still don't have a fully satisfying answer, but hey, we've got some pretty amazing theories worth considering. The leading contender among these theories involves the clever Egyptians employing a sneaky strategy. Now picture this. They constructed a slanted and curving mound made of bricks, earth, and sand encircling the pyramid to be. As the pyramid grew taller and taller, they simply increased the height and length of this wacky structure. It's like they were playing an ancient game of Jenga. Now, how did they get those massive stone blocks up there? Well, according to the legendary ancient Greek historian Herodotus, they used sleds, rollers, and levers. It sounds like they turned construction into a supersized game of tug-of-war. And guess what? Herodotus also claimed that the Great Pyramid, the one from Giza, the granddaddy of them all, took a whopping 20 years to build. There's more. Herodotus also dropped a mind-boggling number on us. 100,000 men were supposedly involved in this pyramid extravaganza. Did they hire the entire Egyptian population? Well, it might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. These men were probably mostly farmers, so they probably focused on the pyramids when there wasn't much work to be done in the fields. Like during the flood season of the Nile River. Obviously, specialists in the archaeological community had something to add to this theory. By the late 20th century, they discovered some evidence that suggests the workforce might have been smaller and more permanent than previously thought. Instead of a massive army of 100,000 pyramid builders, they proposed that a modest crew of around 20,000 workers, accompanied by support personnel like bakers, physicians, and even spiritual leaders, could have gotten the job done. There was also this theory that claimed that the pyramids were actually built from the top downward. It suggested that these colossal structures were nothing more than isolated hills used as quarries. The stones were supposedly drawn from these hills, and over time, competing engineers took charge and transformed them into the iconic pyramids we know today. Now, before you dismiss this theory as a wild fantasy, some folks thought it wasn't completely crazy. After all, there are instances where isolated hills exist, so maybe this theory had a tiny glimmer of truth. Whether it involved ramp building or ingenious work schedules, one thing is clear. Those pyramids have definitely left their mark on history and on our imaginations. Now, speaking of ancient Egyptian mysteries, there's this gigantic unfinished obelisk sitting in ancient Egypt, and scientists are trying to figure out how it was shaped. Now, some people suggest that our industrious ancestors used handheld pounders to get the job done. One expert has a different take on the matter, though. He argues that if we take a closer look at the pattern left behind by the shaping tool, we'll notice something peculiar. The walls of the trenches surrounding the obelisk display a neat and even pattern, which is pretty unlikely if they were pounded away by mere mortal hands. According to this expert, those horizontal striations are usually the result of a tool that takes breaks while removing material, leaving its mark on the surface. But wait, there's more. Imagine the tool being rocked back and forth against the trench walls, clearing away the waste to keep the trench from narrowing. Well, in that case, the tool might have left some funky horizontal striations where it was pressed against the sidewall. This sounds like some fancy technology at play, don't you think? And guess what? The dynastic Egyptians probably didn't have access to that kind of know-how. Another famous Egyptologist from way back also uncovered a bunch of core drills during his adventures. Although the actual drill bits are missing, his collection houses these particular core remnants made of limestone, alabaster, and even granite. These constructions aren't the only amazing thing the ancient Egyptians left behind, though. As it turns out, the Egyptians were the genius minds behind the creation of the handheld mirror. Yeah, that little mirror you use every day to check yourself out. But here's the twist. These mirrors are like pieces of art. They were decorated with inscriptions and figures. But that's not all. The Egyptians had a serious concern with their appearance. They knew the importance of personal hygiene and looking fabulous. So, in their quest for pearly whites, they invented toothbrushes and toothpaste. Dental problems were pretty common back then, and their smiles weren't exactly all white. Dentistry wasn't their strongest suit, you see. Maybe their minds were distracted by all that pyramid building. So that doesn't mean those ancient toothpaste recipes weren't amazing. One delightful concoction included rock salt, mint, dried iris petals, and pepper. Some brave dentists in the 21st century tried it out, and it worked pretty well. Ground-up ash was also used in another recipe to create a tooth cleansing paste. Mint was missing, so that didn't do much for their breath. That's when the genius Egyptians came up with the world's first breath mints. They made tablets from heated spices like cinnamon, and they mixed it with honey. Now, let's shift gears to home decor, Egyptian style. They surely took ornamentation to the next level. While the concept of decorating furniture started in Mesopotamia, the Egyptians cranked it up a notch. They went all out with different colors of ink and even developed various weights of paper. Oh, and let's not forget about those cute little area rugs we all have in our homes today. Guess who came up with the idea? Yep, the Egyptians. They used the versatile papyrus plant to make those cozy rugs. And speaking of trends, the Egyptians loved their knickknacks. They had an assortment of small figurines in the shapes of cats, dogs, and people. These statues were made from various materials, like simple sun-dried mud to the ultimate bling of gold. It all depended on how loaded you were. The Egyptians were also all about farming, and they knew that clean water was crucial for their crops and animals. That's why they came up with some nifty inventions and techniques to make sure their land was fertile and their plants were happy. First off, they had the genius idea of using ox-drawn plows. They had two types of plows, heavy and light. The heavy plow would strut its stuff, cutting deep furrows in the soil, while the lighter plow followed behind, fluffing up the earth. But they didn't stop there. After plowing, the Egyptians would break up clumps of soil and sow the rows with seeds. To give those seeds a good old squish into the furrows, they'd march their livestock across the field, effectively closing up the furrows. But hey, all that hard work would be pointless if their seeds were as dry as the Sahara. That's where irrigation comes into play. The Egyptians were so good at it that other cultures, like the Greeks and Romans, couldn't help but copy their techniques. Now let's switch gears and talk about the marvelous architecture of ancient Egypt. These folks weren't just skilled farmers, they were also architectural maestros. They built these fancy canals to carry water to farms and villages, and boy, did they know how to make those canals look pretty. Just imagine strolling along a canal lined with ornate structures. The Pharaoh Ramesses the Great was quite the overachiever when it came to construction. One of his mind-blowing creations was the construction located at Abu Simbel. This building was designed so that twice a year, the sun would shine directly into it and illuminate the statues of Ramesses. And let's not forget about the corbelled arch. Without this architectural gem, we'd be missing out on some mind-boggling structures like the Great Pyramid. The Egyptians knew how to make things stand tall and proud, thanks to their engineering and construction wizardry. They built grand halls and inner sanctums that make your jaw drop. And some of these temples doubled as astronomical observatories. Secant, cosine, tangent, sine, 3.14159. Yeah, that was the cheer we heard coming from the trigonometry club back in the day. For the rest of us in math class, terms such as sine, tangent, and pi were just bewildering. Who invented these and why? Was their only purpose to make it harder for students? Well, not quite. Trigonometry was invented by the ancient Egyptians. They needed this knowledge to construct pyramids, and they did a pretty good job too. The Great Pyramid in Giza still stands today, some 4,500 years after it was built. No recalls either. So let's get out of that classroom and on a journey through time to reveal the secrets behind the ancient Egyptians' precision. Here you are, standing on the Great Pyramid's construction site, some 9 miles from Cairo. Well, the city still isn't there, as you're surrounded only by the desert and teams of construction workers. They're transporting large stone blocks weighing 2.5 tons each. They're inside a wooden sled that sits on large rollers. A crew of 8 men rolls these blocks along the ground. You immediately think of the rollers on a supermarket cash register. The principle is exactly the same, but the scale is greater, much greater. Scientists estimate that the Egyptians used 2.3 million such blocks in the Great Pyramid alone. And the block in front of you is one of the lighter ones. The heaviest of them weighed up to 15 tons. But where did all these blocks come from? Most of them originated from quarries around Giza. It's not that impressive, you think? But wait until you hear how ancient engineers transported the granite used in construction over 500 miles to the pyramid. There were no railways or highways back then, but the mighty Nile was always there. Researchers even believe that the Egyptians dug a canal to connect the Nile directly to the pyramid's construction site. All they had to do then was to wait for the flood season to begin, and voila! The rising water levels floated the heavy stone blocks for them. But how did they lift the enormous stones on dry land to stack them up to the top? Did they use oversized cranes? Well, ancient Egyptians worked around this problem, literally speaking. One of the workers is now pointing to the giant ramp going around the pyramid they're building. This is how a mountain road zigzags its way to the top. If the ramp went directly to the top of the pyramid, then workers couldn't pull the stone blocks along it. It would be too steep. Scientists have calculated that 8% could be the maximum incline. So ancient Egyptians just extended the ramp around the pyramid. Again, these are all theories, as the ramp could have been inside the pyramid, as some researchers suggest. The exact building method is still a mystery, guarded by the Sphinx. That's its real name, right? Wrong. As the Great Sphinx is just the statue's alias. You know, the name writers take when they want to hide their true identity, or a singer's stage name. The Sphinx's real name, translated from Egyptian, means Horus in the horizon. That was the name for the Egyptian deity of the sky. The trail of mystery doesn't end there. As a man walks past you with a bucket of paint, he's going to add a touch of color to the Great Sphinx. Researchers found specks of this red color next to its ear. That was some strong paint, as it survived for thousands of years. You are now standing straight in front of the Sphinx. You look up. It's very tall, right? 66 feet to be precise. Now resist the urge to take a selfie. You can do it. Now you notice something else. It looks like the Sphinx is in the center of a giant triangle in the back. That's one side of the Great Pyramid. And no, your eyes are not playing tricks on you. The Sphinx really does sit in the center of the pyramid's lateral face. Here's where math comes in handy. A pyramid has 4 sides, called lateral faces. There's also a 5th face, the base, but that's not visible. It's, wait for it, face down. The Sphinx has one last mystery to reveal: its age. Scientists agree that Pharaoh Coffin built the Sphinx. He ruled after his father, who had built a great pyramid nearby. So both structures were finished around the same time. Let's talk about numbers again. You've heard of Cleopatra, the Egyptian princess described as a woman of great beauty.
Hello?
She saw the pyramids, but she lived closer to the time of the first iPhone than the time of the people who built the pyramids. Fascinating, right? You can see thousands of people around you. They're working hard to build the pharaoh's tomb. But how many of them are there exactly? One Greek philosopher estimated there were as many as 100,000 workers. Seems like an okay number for such an enormous structure, but it can't be true. Science simply can't back up this number. Egyptologists put the total number of workers at 30,000. And yes, Indiana Jones was one of them, at least on the big screen, but he showed up late. Egyptologists know a lot about the pyramids, but not everything. Not because they don't want to, but because they haven't yet dug up enough evidence. They can only guess how the building process went. First, engineers would arrive to choose the right spot and do the necessary measurements. That's why they needed all that complicated math. Then, it's time for sourcing the material, the large stone blocks I mentioned earlier. When boats deliver them to the site of the future pyramid, workers can finally do their thing. They operated in smaller groups, but there were at least 2,000 of them chiseling and carving away at any given time. Sounds like a typical construction site today? Well, that's because it is, just thousands of years ago. It's amazing what ancient Egyptians were able to achieve with just copper and stone tools. The pyramid is now complete in front of you. But is it the same pyramid we see today? Why is this structure shining bright in the desert sun? Isn't it supposed to be a dusty yellow color? Well, no. Human activity and the elements have completely stripped the outer layer of stones over time. Expert craftspeople polished these blocks using nothing but stone and sand. The end result was a smooth and shiny rock. On the day it was completed, The Great Pyramid of Giza was a perfect triangle of light. Its polished sides acted like giant mirrors, reflecting the powerful Egyptian sun. This is the point where you should put your glasses on, and that shiny thing you see at the pyramid's very top is actually gold. The capstone at the top of the pyramid is called a pyramidion. It was covered in sheets of gold. As you can guess, these were the first stones to disappear. Let's make another stop before we get you back to your classroom. We travel to the British Isles, and no, Stonehenge isn't our destination. It is Newgrange in County Meath. Scientists estimate that the ancient peoples of Ireland built this stone monument around the year 3200 BCE. This makes it older than both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid in Giza. The function of the circular mound in Newgrange is the same as the one of the Great Pyramid and equally mysterious. The estimated amount of loose stone present in the valley is over 220,000 tons. And it's not just randomly thrown on a pile. The order in which the stones are set makes the structure water-resistant. That would explain how Newgrange had survived for so long. Kinda makes you want to splash out the cash for that waterproof phone case, huh? Well, you're back in your school desk, but today's math lecture is the last thing on your mind. You're thinking about how great the Egyptian pyramids are, and if we have something similar today. It turns out modern engineers are just as impressed with the Great Pyramid as you are. There's a glass pyramid sitting in the main courtyard of the famous Louvre Museum in Paris. The panorama of San Francisco wouldn't be complete without the 48-story Trans-America Pyramid. But Las Vegas went the furthest. There we find the Luxor Hotel. It's so big that it's the third largest pyramid on the planet. And guess what's in front of it? Yup, a replica of the Sphinx. It's 110 feet tall, 2 stories higher than the one in Giza. Yeah, everything's bigger in Vegas.